The Vibe Catch podcast brings you the latest in employee engagement, workforce productivity, and people analytics.
We have the pleasure to talk to Dasa Suissa, who is a leadership and organizational development consultant and coach. Dasa is also a lecturer at the Charles University in Prague, where she teaches several HR and adult development related subjects. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us today, Dasa. How are you?
Hi, and thanks for having me here. Good, thank you.
We thought we start the conversation around employee engagement because that's a topic that it's extremely accurate and acute today, and I feel that it's kind of a lot of people are actually even misunderstanding what employee engagement is not, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on what employee engagement is not in today's let's just say HR landscape.
Okay, yes, I feel there's a lot of confusion around what employee engagement is and isn't, and I believe that probably the most common confusion is based around employee satisfaction. So very often people think that these two things are interchangeable, but actually they're quite different concepts. So employee engagement basically is an extent to which employees basically feel aligned with the organizational purpose and the organizational goals, while employee satisfaction is more about the level of comfort. Yeah, so it's more about how satisfied and how comfortable they feel in their jobs. And I don't know if you feel that, but these are pretty much different concepts. So
yes, indeed.
Yeah. So while employee engagement really almost takes the employee out of their ways to really be passionate about what they do and to really care about the outcome of their jobs and to really walk the extra mile, employee satisfaction is more about, okay, I'm happy, I'm satisfied, but that's all. I'll just do what's needed and then walk off and go home. So I believe it's a little counterintuitive, but employee engagement is not just about positive feelings, but it's about quite a balance between some positive, even positive emotions, a positive kind of motivation felt by the employee, but also a level of discomfort, dissatisfaction with how the things are, so that they feel the need to actually achieve for something better, to accomplish something better. Whereas with employee satisfaction, you don't really feel that drive, yeah, and that's why in organizations we really look more into driving employee engagement rather than driving employee satisfaction.
That's a very interesting point you make, and I'm happy you mentioned emotion into the conversation. You brought emotion into the conversation because I think we are not even encouraged to express emotion. It's kind of, I think it's a culture. How should I say, an upbringing, how we are raised maybe in the Western modern world, that kind of we don't express that much emotion, and I think that kind of spills over into our work lives in a way that, as you said, it's good to if you're just satisfied with your work, but what about how you feel about your work, and how does that, like, where does that spark for feeling about your work come from or should come from? Is that a leadership, let's just say, role where the leadership lays out the vision and inspires actually the employees to feel the same way about the company as they do, or is it a combination of both, like employees and leaders?
Yes, that's a good question, and I genuinely believe that it comes down to both. So really engaged employees are not waiting for their leader or for their peers or for their organizations to make them engaged. there needs to be a level of engagement existing in them already. Yeah, but the role of leaders and organizations is to at least not to destroy that initial level of engagement and to allow it to even expand, to create conditions so that the employees can really thrive and build on their initial level of engagement. Does it make sense?
Yes, it does. And I've recently came across some studies done by Harvard Business Review, the importance of employee engagement on performance. And speaking of that, for the listeners, all the resources that we mentioned in the podcast will be as links in the podcast page description. And the study found that actually companies who have a high level of employee engagement also display a higher level of customer service. So the engagement of employees within a company actually spills over into a better customer service, a more positive attitude, basically a higher productivity, which reflects then in all aspects of the business life. And I think that also what the study found is that the most impactful employee engagement drivers were the recognition given for high performance. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so are we talking about the link between engagement and its impact on performance?
Yes,
is that what you want me
exactly.
to talk about?
So how does actually product engagement reflect on productivity from
yes
experience?
Okay. Yeah, there's a load of research available on that link. It provides us with some different numbers, but no matter where the research comes from, it does always tell us that there's an absolutely clear link between high levels of engagement and high levels of organizational performance. And not only that, for example, recently I've read a research which said that those companies with high levels of engagement outperform those that have low levels of employee engagement by more than 200%.
Oh, that's quite a lot.
Yeah, I think that's worth taking into account. And not only that, even if we look into some other data that are related to organizational performance, like levels of customer service or levels of absenteeism or levels of staff turnover, we keep seeing the same link.
Yeah.
So the higher levels of engagement, the lower levels of absenteeism, and so on and so on. I got actually quite interested in that, and several years ago when I was working for a company, we were doing some engagement surveys, of course, as well, and I wanted to just see if the same can be confirmed in our own environment. And so we did a mini research inside the company, and we could see exactly the same results.
Okay, that's amazing. And I'm happy you mentioned absenteeism, because that's one of the let's just say results of poor engagement within companies. And in a recent article published on BBC about the millennial burnout, it was quite clear that we are living in a very high-paced society, and it's expected from us to always be online, be delivering, always on our mobile, answering emails, notifications, and that leads us to obviously a burnout, because we're not machines. We have a certain number of functioning hours that we can be highly productive, and I think that's quite let's say a big thing in today's businesses, because if if you have more people in burnout and you have more people in absence because of medical reasons, then obviously you're not going to make money. And every business's aim is, at least one of them, is to make extra money. Speaking of that, one question that comes to my mind is that seeing that a lot of companies are kind of not ignoring but overlooking the fact that the employees are the biggest assets and you should take care of them. I feel that they're not really taking any steps to engage them really, and there may be a number of reasons why that happens, but probably one of the reasons is that companies don't know how to start with engagement, don't know how to actually approach this or what engagement is. So how would somebody, a company, mid-size, big-size company, talking about mid and big size, because smaller companies, if you have 10 employees, it's quite easy to get the feeling of your company because you see them every day. You're probably in the same room most of the time. But what about bigger companies that would like to start with engagement?
Yes, definitely. That there is a difference between how you go about it when you're in a small environment and when you operate in an environment which is anonymized to a high level. So when that's the case, you obviously lose touch with the pulse of what's going on, and therefore I think one of the reasons it is a little more difficult to really engage employees in larger environments is that many companies tend to treat employees really as resources. Just let's look at the actual name of what we do,
Yes.
with people or for people in companies. It's HR, human resources. So I genuinely believe that if we just believe that people are resources in the first place, we are never going to be just enough authentic in really engaging employees. Yeah, so I think that deep down there is an assumption around what employees are for and how to treat employees that is first to be tackled. Yeah,
I agree.
To really look into okay, what's my approach to employees? Do I want to approach them as human beings? Do I want to approach them as adults? Because very often what you can see is that HR departments, companies in general, approach their employees as if they were small children. Yeah.
Yeah, that's even though there are a lot of companies who say, or at least our biggest resources are our employees, but yet they're not treating them as their most valuable resource in that sense, or as humans. They look still at as a commodity.
Exactly, and I think that's part of the problem, because that creates an unbalanced relationship between the two parties, because if you really treat people in your companies as human beings, then there's a partnership between them, and that is already something that is quite engaging for employees. But when you really come from that vantage point of my employees are my resources, that's already something deeply disengaging in itself. So you might have expected that I would tell you all sorts of steps to take.
Yeah, I was looking for that, but I do understand why that's a little bit more challenging to say that. And you put the accent on the partnership between companies and employees, and that's the main keyword in that relationship. That reminds me from a sales training I had many years ago, where they were teaching us that you are not actually selling to another company, you're selling to people. You're always selling to people, even no matter who you're speaking with, you're speaking with the person. So you're selling your product to a person. So the same way HR or companies should actually treat their employees as a partnership and address them as their equals in that sense. It's quite difficult to make a distinction between the entity as a company and the employees, because in a way the company is the employees. It's such a weird way of expressing it, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think there's even something quite interesting in using words like, for example, assets. Yeah, I know it's a better way how to talk about HR and people and employees in general. It's an asset, but still it comes down from that accounting perspective, right? Like,
exactly.
They are my asset,
Exactly.
right? So there's no partnership in that like way of approaching it. So I believe, going back to your initial question, if you really want to start working on employee engagement and you really mean it, look first into your assumptions and mindsets around what people are for in the company and how you want to treat them.
Actually, that's one of the probably main issues with employee engagement today. I think it's the mindset, and you said it quite right. It doesn't really help what measures you take if you don't have the mindset for that particular measure. That's quite a big topic on how the mindset, how we should change our mindset as individuals, as a matter of fact, and as organizations. And I think I would love to talk about the mindset, and most likely we will talk in a different episode. I would like to thank you for this great conversation, really powerful thoughts and ideas. For our listeners, we hope you enjoyed listening to this conversation. You can find the links to the resources we mentioned in the podcast, and we hope to entertain you with some awesome HR topics and engagement topics in future episodes as well. Thank you for listening.
Thank you too.
Thanks for listening to the VibeCatch podcast. Visit our website, vibecatch.com, for more resources and insights on employee engagement, human productivity, and HR technology. Don't forget to subscribe to get the latest podcast right in your inbox.